What's the first thing you think of when someone mentions the movie Avatar? Blue people? Or outdated CGI? By now, most everyone knows the story of Avatar. But for those that don't, here's a SparkNotes version. In a dystopian future, a ravaged Earth relies on extracting energy resources from the distant moon of Pandora. The Resources Development Administration, or RDA, tries to pacify Pandora's native people, the Na'vi, with doppelgangers controlled by humans, called Avatar. One such Avatar is Jake Sully. But instead of manipulating the Na'vi, he falls in love with Neytiri and her people's way of life, eventually leading a successful revolt against the RDA. But I bet you don't consider how this story is considered the highest-grossing, most viewed environmental film of all time. That's right, screenwriter and director James Cameron so heavily embedded this action movie with the theme of protecting nature that it's also an environmental film. So if Avatar is so influential, what message is it really sending to millions of viewers around the world? This video will explore the nuance of the film's portrayal of sustainability. Since much of Avatar's environmental acclaim comes from its native, anti-capitalist characters, we will focus on two primary lenses of analysis: ecofeminism and the treatment of indigenous people. Taking a deeper look at Avatar with these lenses will determine the true intersectionality and merit of the film's portrayal of environmentalism. Ultimately, you will come to see how Avatar paints a hierarchical, exclusive, and idealistic portrait of sustainability. So first, let's get familiar with ecofeminism. According to Charis Thompson, former gender and women's studies professor at UC Berkeley, ecofeminism is environmental philosophy that emphasizes the intimate relationship between women and nature. Ecofeminism finds its roots in pre-industrial societies, where women are tasked with growing crops, gathering firewood, and raising children. All of these roles make a woman's existence deeply tied with the environment. Just think of the concept of Mother Nature. The natural world is always characterized as having a nurturing, feminine presence. Ecofeminism argues that the same patriarchal, capitalistic forces that degrade the environment are also the same forces that oppress women. To remedy these forces, ecofeminists champion interconnection over social hierarchy. Now, let's get a central background on the other frame of analysis: the treatment of indigenous people. Throughout colonization, white Americans' perception of native people shifted from viewing them as animalistic, ignoble savages to the rational but doomed noble savage. Finally, anthropologist Shepard Kirch describes in his book, The Ecological Indian, a final, modern stereotype of indigenous people. The ecological Indian is the ideal protector of the environment, who, quote, feels deep sympathy with all living forms and takes steps to conserve Earth's harmonies, end quote. Throughout my analysis, you will come to see how this stereotype, although positive, has deeply harmful implications. Armed with the knowledge we need, let's begin to dissect Avatar. One of the most striking things about Avatar is the dichotomy it illustrates between nature and man. In the film, humans represent a hyper-masculine world of military hierarchy and insatiable capitalist demand. In other words, humans embody Western society. Under ecofeminism, the humans of Avatar are the perfect foil to the Na'vi, a close-knit people who have spiritual ties to nature through their earth goddess, Iwa. Furthermore, all named female characters in Avatar fall on the side of environmental protector. Such characters, although given a fraction of screen time, are strongly written and fiercely independent. Notably, the character Mowat is the tribe's high priestess, asserting the spiritual authority of women in the Avatar world. According to Iowa State University, Avatar is even part of the 58% of films that pass the Bechdel test, which measures women's representation in fiction. However, any ecofeminist gains in greater gender equality are ultimately overshadowed by the racial power hierarchy created by the protagonist. After learning from the Na'vi people, Jake assumes leadership over them in the fight for Pandora. As the Nashville Film Institute explains, quote, "Low-angle camera angles are ideal for conveying supremacy," end quote. Jake is frequently shown in low-angle shots, giving him power over other characters, who are depicted as helpless and vulnerable through high-angle shots. Dialogue also shows a clear subordination of indigenous people, pleading for Jake's help.
If you are one of us, help us.
Jake's textbook white savior complex exemplifies Western society's hegemony over environmentalism. His character asserts that the West dominates environmental protection just as easily as it dominates environmental destruction. This same power imbalance that excludes Na'vi from environmental leadership is also mirrored in the real world. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, industrialized countries are widely responsible for carbon emission and have the most international influence on climate treaties. Yet it is developing countries that are most vulnerable to climate change. Knowing the Na'vi are depicted as lesser than Jake, let's further examine their portrayal. Neytiri, the central Na'vi woman, is introduced by stalking Jake like a leopard. Her appearance and actions have a dangerous, animalistic characterization. Neytiri and indigenous people only earn human characterization as Jake becomes familiarized with them. Under the Western eye, their portrayal softens, and the Na'vi become the empathetic and stoic stereotype of the ecological Indian. This is seen as Neytiri deeply mourns the death of a predator and imparts sage ecological wisdom onto Jake. The Na'vi's deep association to the environment is best seen through their neural connections with plants and animals. These Tehelu bonds are shown to distort the pupils of animals, but not the Na'vi.
That is Tehelu, the bond. Feel her. Feel her heartbeat, her breath. Feel her strong legs. You may tell her what to do inside.
Thus, a pecking order is asserted. The ecological Indian has control over nature, but the fully human, Western power has control over them all. This hierarchy of the natural world defies the egalitarian principles of ecofeminism. Aside from this anthropological racism, there are several other issues implied by the ecological Indian trope's use. Firstly, the precedent of perfect stewardship robs modern indigenous people of individuality and scrutinizes them for making the same utilitarian environmental decisions that other ethnic groups make. The ecological Indian also conjures a false, utopic past of humanity's relationship with the environment, when, in reality, Kirch details that Native Americans have also overhunted animals, caused water scarcity, and had complex land use practices. Simplifying this narrative perpetuates elitist preservationist ideology. According to LA Public Broadcasting, preservationism argues that nature is only valuable when it is untouched by man. This doctrine discriminates against low-income communities that need mixed land uses to survive. Now, let's shift gears to critique one of the pillars of the Na'vi's ecological Indian identity, their nature-centric religion. Iwa, their earth deity, is one of the most prominent ecofeminist components of the film. Iwa is depicted as an innately feminine force, and one scene in particular showcases her power. A dying Grace and her avatar lie in fetal position, demonstrating absolute vulnerability and submission to Iwa as the tribe seeks to save her. Iwa's power flows into them through roots, arranged like an umbilical cord, the ultimate metaphor for humanity's dependence on nature. This power dynamic crafts the film's conclusion. The protagonists are only able to defeat the RDA once Iwa sends a swarm of animals. Iwa's ability to restore the natural balance demonstrates Gaia theory, which, according to Harvard University, contends that the entire planet is a self-regulating being. Although faith in the supposed rationality of nature worked for Avatar characters, in real life it has a dangerous consequence of disincentivizing actions against environmental issues. Optimistic hope in nature's resilience detaches urgency and responsibility from ecological crises such as climate change. Now to address common opposition to my analysis. Some might claim Avatar's depiction of sustainability is sufficient because it elicits an emotional response from the audience, helping them recognize the intrinsic value of nature. However, as Mexican actor Diego Luna once said, "Cinema is a mirror that can change the world." Although Avatar helps us recognize environmental injustice, its message only changes the world if it dives deeper through intersectionality and engaging with systemic issues. Just think of how much more meaningful Avatar's portrait of sustainability would be if humans recognized and vowed to change the resource overconsumption habits that led them to Pandora in the first place. Furthermore, beautiful landscape shots are Avatar's main vehicle for making us care about the wilderness of Pandora. Aestheticism is a weak defense of the environment. After all, insects and mineral deposits are hardly emotionally appealing, but their ecological importance still warrants our protection. Ultimately, Avatar paints a well-intentioned, but flawed, portrait of sustainability. Tropes such as Mother Nature and the ecological Indian prove to be more than just tired stereotypes. They dangerously simplify humanity's relationship to nature, giving way to passivity and polarization within the environmental movement. By acknowledging the shortcomings of Avatar's environmental messages, we can begin to think more critically about films with activist messages and create substantial, intersectional change in the real world.